Today on the Working Cows podcast, we're going to talk to Dr. Alan Williams and Kyle Richardville from Understanding Ag about the blessings of agriculture. Part of what we mean by that is that God created a self-healing, self-organizing, self-regulating system that will be bountiful if we match our management with His design.
We went out into this field that pretty much was full of thistle. It was 90% thistle. And I dug in the soil around the thistle. What was very evident was it was very active in breaking up significant compaction in the soil. It was very deeply rooted. There were lots of earthworm activity around the thistle. There was a lot of aggregation forming because it's also mycorrhizal, strongly mycorrhizal. And then we dug in places where there were no thistle, and none of that was happening.
Unfortunately, our management for a long time in American agriculture has been fighting against some of these very things that God created in this system.
The all-important E word that gets thrown around, efficiency. Our agricultural system is supposed to be, the most efficient the world's ever seen, but that's only in the metrics that people are looking at. And it's my opinion that when you look at the 4 ecosystem processes, our agricultural system is woefully inefficient in capturing and using solar energy. It's woefully inefficient in infiltrating water and using that water and holding it for later. It's woefully inefficient, like Alan said, of using all the latent banks of nutrients that are in the soil because we're farming in a flower pot mostly in the top 6 inches. And a whole lot of farms have way more subsoil with a giant nutrient bank lower than that root zone that we're just not taking advantage of. And then the fourth one is life. We're just not living and promoting life to the abundance, which can fix that whole thing and make all of those first 3 cycles work.
All that and more on this episode 480 of the Working Cows podcast, brought to you by Understanding Ag.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows podcast, recorded exclusively in the Understanding Ag studios. Very excited to be joined once again by Dr. Alan Williams, and for the first time by Kyle Richardville. And we're going to talk to them about the blessings of agriculture. And a lot of that is about the design that exists in agriculture, the design that exists in the world that was what we believe placed there by God. And that if we match our management with that design, that system will be bountiful and fruitful, and we will get to fulfill some of that purpose that God originally created us for. So I'm excited to share this conversation with you. This is the last episode that we will be partnering with Understanding Ag to create with their consultants, and just want to say it's been a great run. Really appreciate them making an investment and getting the word out to you guys about the work that they are doing, and just want to thank them so much for their partnership over the last couple of years, and looking forward to 2026 and the opportunity to partner with new businesses there to let you know about the work that they are doing to serve those, especially in regenerative agriculture. So for one last time, here is a word from our sponsor today, Understanding Ag. Are rising input costs keeping you up at night? At Understanding Ag, they help producers like you save money and build resilience through regenerative agriculture. Their team of experienced farmers and ranchers will show you how to reduce reliance on costly fertilizers, pesticides, and feed by working with nature, not against it. With proven regenerative practices, you can improve soil health, boost water retention, and increase your land's productivity while cutting expenses. From grazing plans to cover cropping to full system redesigns, they tailor solutions to your land and your goals. Let them help you make the transition from input-intensive, conventional, to profit-enhancing regenerative agriculture. Visit understandingag.com and take the first step toward a more profitable and sustainable future. Kyle, Alan, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows podcast.
Pleasure to be here as always, Clay.
Yeah, thanks so much, Clay. It's a real honor. I've listened to so many of these on my travels, and it's a real pleasure to be actually in one of these episodes.
Yeah, very good. Well, I'm looking forward to this conversation on the blessings of agriculture. What are some of those things that kind of jump to the front of your mind when we talk about the blessings of agriculture?
Alan, if I may start, and then you can jump in. Alan and I were talking about this before the episode, and we think it's a little important to define what we even call a blessing, right? So if we're thinking about it from the biblical perspective, we were talking about the ancient Israelites. And anytime you see the land deteriorating, you'll always find a disobedience of the ancient Israelites, and then the drought follows, and then the crop failures follow, and then the pestilence follows, right? And so um, I guess we just wanted to make it known up front that we have a lot of agency in receiving the blessings ourselves. This isn't just God kind of randomly applying blessings and curses to people he likes and don't like. But, when God gives us the commands and says, I created all this, I know what's best for you guys, and I know the outcome will be better for you if you live this way, and then you don't live that way, then it's just kind of like the natural results are less than ideal, or you could call them curses in the biblical corpus. So, I was thinking about a way we could think about it today, and I was thinking about a parent, right? So you tell your child, hey, if you clean your room, I'll give you an allowance. That allowance could be a blessing, right? But it depends on them performing that task. Whereas if they snuck out and they went to the movies instead of doing that, cleaning their room, and you ground them, that's the curse idea, right? So for me, yeah, I think that we have a lot of agency, and that's the point we want to make today in how we behave and how we treat the land and the results that follow. And hopefully we can have more blessings that pile up on top of each other. Alan, anything to add there?
One of the things, Clay, that in our work that I believe we have clearly discerned and discovered is that the abundance that God originally put there, particularly in the soil, is still there. Now, whether we're able to realize that abundance or not is all up to us and our stewardship of the soil that we have control over. And so to me, that speaks volumes. Um, you know, what what we're taught, Clay, relative to curses and things like that, when the Bible talks about curses and God cursed the ground and God cursed this and cursed that, God did not have to supernaturally curse anything. Rather, what that means, when you really go back and you dive deep into the scripture and you look at the original Hebrew text and all of that, what it really means is that God foreknew what was going to happen when we failed in our stewardship. And he knew that essentially we were going to be the ones that created the failure. Hence, we were the ones that brought a curse upon ourselves. So God has never had to supernaturally curse us or curse the earth. We take care of all of that by our own failure. Even with Adam and Eve in the expulsion from the garden. God did not supernaturally curse the soil and the earth. The seed for the thorns and thistles was already there from the very inception of creation. And that was because God, in his infinite wisdom, knew that there would be a fall. There would be a failure of man. And he provided for that. So the very thing that we view as an abject curse, those thorns and thistles, are the very things that heal very broken and damaged soil and start that process. So the very thing that we view as God hurled down this supernatural curse of thorns and thistles, no, they were already there. God just foreknew the failure that was to come, and he had a plan. He had a plan to cover us from that and have a way to heal this earth, and those healing plants that even to this day, Clay, we still call weeds. Those healing plants are still there, and they are still there to perform that exact same function. And in our work, that is exactly what we have discovered, that when we allow these thistles, these thorns, many of the other plants we're calling weeds, to grow to fruition, then they are merely successionary. And they're there for a moment in time to do their job, to heal whatever is wrong with the soil and to pave the way for plants that we deem more favorable.
One of the things that occurs to me, a couple of things. First of all, when we see the Israelites or the people of God sinning, the issue is the curse isn't that God, like you said, sent a supernatural curse because of their sin. It's that on a parallel trajectory, their neglect of the landscape is occurring with their neglect of obedience to God's standards related to, whatever you want to throw in there, loving your neighbor, marriage, all these things. As they are not doing those things, they're also, as they're neglecting to love their neighbor, they're also neglecting to care for the land. Would that be what you're saying?
That is exactly correct. And that's exactly what we see. So, and as you read through many different books of the Old Testament, that are telling the story of the nation of Israel, you see this repeated behavior over and over again. And, you see good king, bad king, good king, bad king, and, and when they were obedient, the land was abundant. And it wasn't abundant because God supernaturally made it abundant. It was abundant because they were obedient, and the obedience encompasses everything. It encompasses their stewardship to the land. And we've got to remember, Clay, that is precisely why man was placed here to begin with. We go back to Genesis chapter 2, right? And we look at why God placed man in the garden, to tend and to keep it. And if you go back to the original Hebrew, that word tend means to lovingly caress, to care for, to steward. Okay. And so that's why we were placed here to begin with. We were essentially citizen kings, charged with spreading Eden across the entire face of the earth. That was our original charge. And with the nation of Israel, what we saw is that, when they were given the promised land, which was God's intention for return to Eden, right? That was his intention, to return man back to Eden again. So when they entered the promised land and they were obedient, it was very abundant. And they had very few issues. But when they were disobedient, absolutely, we saw that they were very disobedient also in their stewardship of the land. So they failed in all respects, not just worshiping pagan gods. It was also failure to be good stewards of the soil. And every time they did that, then the soil failed them. Pestilence, famine, drought, on and on. And we see this pattern repeated. And the truth is, we still see this pattern repeated yet today.
Do you think it would be fair to say there's some kind of overarching or meta lesson here, is that if the people don't have order and balance inside of them, they're not going to be able to create order and balance outside of them, whether it be the community, the land they're stewarding, the state or the world, and this isn't an indictment on farmers. We also live within a system that's been created by the governments and by big companies that is largely about money, in my opinion. And so if we're trying to squeeze every dollar that we can out of the land, the natural, aim of everybody is not at upward the upward benevolent, characteristics that God tells us to aim for. Then what we're going to do is ruin the land, and in many respects we have decreased the ecosystem function of the land. And so, yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there, that there's kind of a parallel between what's inside of everybody is portrayed in the landscape that we're stewarding. So
I want to go, a little deeper on some of what we've already touched on. A couple more things. One of them is when we look at the landscape, and I've thought this for a long time, especially since I've started to become aware of soil health and how it's all working, is you see God's wisdom in the weeds, right? That the more unhealthy the landscape becomes, the harder the weeds are to kill, the less palatable they are to animals. And so those are out there being very aggressive plants, and they are there to cover the landscape. And if we would let them go through that successional process, eventually they would draw up the nutrients to the soil surface, create the carbon on the soil surface that is needed to repair that landscape. Now, oftentimes we short circuit that process and don't let it go through its process. But that's, what I've always thought, man, that is such a wise design to, as it becomes more unhealthy, it gets harder to control, and then we can go down another rabbit hole some other time about the fact that many of those weeds are actually very highly nutrient dense and put healing compounds, right? You start to think about things we call weeds that are actually food, medicine for us. But that's probably another vein that we haven't quite broached yet. So what do you think about that, the wisdom in the weeds?
Well, just super quick here, and then I'll let Kyle interject here. But to give a humorous anecdote to this, one of our clients, and they're a rather large rancher, and they, on certain areas of this particular ranch, they were seeing a lot of thistle coming up. and I still remember going out there to consult and them taking me to this spot and really bemoaning the fact that they had all this, oh my gosh, what are we doing wrong? What do we need to do here? Do we need to mow? Do we need to spray? I don't understand why all this thistle is here. And I said, well, let's walk out here. And as you know, Clay, I always have a shovel with me, right? So, we went out into this field that pretty much was full of thistle. It was 90% thistle. And I dug in the soil around the thistle. And what was very evident was it was very active in breaking up significant compaction in the soil. It was very deeply rooted. There were lots of earthworm activity around the thistle. And there was a lot of aggregation forming because it's also mycorrhizal, strongly mycorrhizal. And then we dug in places where there were no thistle, and none of that was happening. Okay. And they were blown away by that. And they were just like, oh my gosh, so you mean the thistle is actually helping us? And I said, yes. And they said, so what do we do? And I said, let it grow to fruition. And then, it will heal the land, and you'll begin to see other plants now outcompete it because the thistle no longer is needed. And their immediate response to me was, well, we've got some other areas on the ranch that are not very good yet. Should I go buy more thistle seed?
Yeah, that's the challenge of the paradigm, right? That I had a guy tell me one time that he loves, the yellow flowered weed. Well, he loves leafy spurge. He loves leafy spurge because his goats just go to town on it and they thrive, and it's like, probably don't want to say that very loud outside of this circle right here. And I haven't mentioned his name, so. But yeah. Kyle, did you have something to add there?
This just gets me thinking about the Sabbath and how important rest is. Alan, you talk so much about recovery and rest periods after grazing and everything, but in doing research for this in Second Chronicles, God and his prophets, Judah is exiled and the land becomes desolate and finally enjoys its Sabbath rest, is how it's written. And then in Leviticus 23, God commands, Yahweh states that because Israel did not keep the law of the Sabbath fallow, Yahweh will give those Sabbaths back to the land over the course of the exile. And so, this idea of weeds and letting them go through their life cycle in succession, for me comes all the way back to Sabbath, not squeezing every ounce of productivity out of the land, but living sustainably and understanding that the land needs a rest sometimes. And again, this isn't an indictment on farmers by any means because, the economic and political pressures that are put on them, but we have to realize that we are degrading our natural resource base and our most important one, which is the soil, and there are going to be repercussions for that. And, you read David Montgomery's Dirt, the Erosion of Soil, and you see after a certain amount of time and a certain amount of disturbance, the land will rest fallow, whether you want it to or not.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Understanding Ag. As farmers and ranchers, we've all heard pitches from ag consultants about the next great new product that will increase our yields, pounds, or animal performance. And each of those silver bullets comes with a price tag that you pay year after year, taking more money out of your pockets and putting it into someone else's. Our friends at Understanding Ag aren't out to sell you anything, but the knowledge to grow healthier soils, plants, animals, and profits. Their goal is to help you become your own best manager, a short-term client, but a long-term friend and partner on the road to regeneration. If you're still waiting for that next year that's going to be better, maybe it's time you give Understanding Ag a call. Check them out at understandingag.com. I know you'll be glad you did. We'll pick up that. I want to go back to something Alan said earlier about the pattern in the garden. And so Genesis 1:2, the earth was formless and void, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters, right? That in the Hebrew that rhymes. In the beginning the earth was formless and void. That rhymes. Tohu vavohu is what that is in the Hebrew. And then what does God do? He fills it, right? With trees and plants and animals and all these things, right? And then he puts man in the garden and he says, fill the earth and subdue it. What does that mean? What I believe that means is God says, here's the pattern of abundance in the garden. Go make the rest of the land look like this. And so that's what he was sending them out to do, is to take that garden pattern of abundance and fill the earth with it. And so that's been our role, is to create abundance from the beginning if we are working according to God's design, right?
Yeah, and let's take that one step further, Clay. So number one, you're right. God placed man in the garden, this place of incredible abundance. And he said, yes, your charge is to spread this abundance across the face of the earth. And he gave a direct command, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth to abundance, right? He had actually given that command earlier to the fish and the fowl, if we recall, in Genesis chapter 1. He told them to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth to abundance. And then he told Adam, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth to abundance. And then he gave that same command a third time after the flood. Okay, he gave it to Noah and Noah's sons. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth to abundance. Now, do we believe that? Do we believe God or not is my question here. Because, remember that when he created man was not to die, right? Okay. So do we truly believe in an abundant earth? Think about this, guys, okay? If Adam and Eve had not fallen, then death would not have reigned. And death entered the world for all things through Adam and Eve, right? And their failure. Death was not known in the world prior to that for anything, none of the creatures, including man. Okay. So do we believe God's command to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth to abundance? And where in Scripture did it say, okay, after a certain point, stop it, guys, stop filling the earth? Okay. He never said that. Okay. So God, and this is very hard for the human mind to wrap our minds around, but it's absolutely true. God created this earth to infinitely increase in abundance. Period. That still is in play today. Okay. And again, it's up to us to be able to pick back on that Edenic vision and to continue it.
The proof of what you're saying is that he repeated the command after the flood, right? If abundance wasn't still possible, he wouldn't have repeated the command after the flood, right? So that is, I just wanted to throw that in there. I have more directions that I want to go with this, but I'd let Kyle add any thoughts he had. I'd like to pick the Sabbath discussion back up, actually. Sabbath, there's so much there, right? But what fundamentally what Sabbath says is I'm not God. I'm not responsible to work 7 days a week to provide for myself. God is ultimately the one who is providing for me, and I trust him enough to take one day and give it to him and allow him, to sow into my life through the word, and then also to just profess my trust that he's going to make up the difference. I could go out and accomplish more today, but I trust that he's going to provide for me if I don't, right? And then that also, because they had not just the Sabbath day, but also the Sabbath year, built in to their calendars, that when we rest from our labors, we are giving the land a chance to rest too, right? So we'll pick that discussion up and go a little further there. Alan, did you have anything to add there? Because Kyle started us off with that thought.
Well, certainly, Kyle called up, several passages in Leviticus, and and obviously, you've also got to go to Leviticus chapter 25, and where it talks about the sabbatical year, and even the year of Jubilee and all of that follows that. But it's very clear, that God does give this mandate to the nation of Israel in Leviticus chapter 25, especially in the first 7 verses are very critical here. But he says every 7th year the land is to have a year of rest, right? However, this has often been presented incorrectly in our churches. We're failing to read this fully and within full context. And so when it talks about the sabbatical year, the year of rest, year 7, it's not that land just absolutely lays abjectly fallow, okay? It's not that at all. And if you read how it describes it, it does say whatever the land yields during the Sabbath year will be food for you, for yourself, your male and female servants, the hired workers, the transients, the aliens, the temporary residents, and this is very critical, and for your livestock and the wild animals in your land, whatever the land produces may be eaten. So this is core to what we do today, Clay, in regenerative agriculture, and where we have found, in the 6 principles of soil health, the 6th principle, animal integration, right here in Leviticus chapter 25, verse 7, okay? Animal integration in the year of rest. God is specifically stating your domesticated animals, your livestock, are to graze the land in the year of fallow. You're not to keep them out of it, okay? And even the wild animals. Why? Because God knew, just like the weeds are the healers of the soil, right? So are the animals. So are the animals. Their impact on the soil, their ability to be able to shed microbes and to provide natural fertility of manure and urine and all of that is absolutely core to this sabbatical year healing. But you rarely hear in our churches anybody talk about that, and that God actually placed, and mandated animals graze year 7, period.
Was that the carnivore diet then, year 7?
Absolutely. As we always say, we eat more plants and more diversity of plants than vegans do because our animals do.
Right. Very good. Kyle, I saw you taking notes there. What do you have to add?
I was just thinking also, it's not just the sabbatical rest, but offering our first fruits and our unblemished stock, even when we are working, those years we are working, it's important to tithe and trust God with our top or our first or our best. And when the Israelites forwent that, then curses followed as well. There's a reading of the story of Cain and Abel, right? That Cain, his offerings weren't accepted by God, and the understanding is he gave God not his best. And the story is just to show. And then Abel did, as the shepherd, he gave his best as the sacrifice. And so, that's also something we need to talk about. We need the rest, but also in the times when we're working, are we offering our best and our, the top, the first bit that we're producing to God as well? Do we have that trust?
Yeah, very good. What other ideas or concepts would you like to include here? What are you thinking about?
So I was also writing notes on, what the messages that we're saying directly contradict the messages that we're hearing from, secular society. So here's one that I was thinking, Alan, when you're talking about abundance and almost infinite abundance on this planet, boy, isn't that just nearly the opposite of this overpopulated, anti-humanist, we're just little germ colonies on a petri dish, and the bigger we grow, we're just going to use up all the resources and poof, off we go, So there was that one. And then another one was, Clay, you're exactly right. There is a God and I'm not him. Like, that is such an important message. And when you have 8 billion people that, their aim isn't on themselves, but it's on something bigger than themselves, God, like how many blessings can we provide, and we can be blessings to other people versus, in our very consumerist, individualistic society where it's actually, we have 8 billion people who think they're the focal point of the universe, and when that's the case, usually curses follow. So I just thought it was interesting. We were talking about these things, and they almost diametrically oppose what we hear from society writ large.
And to follow through on that, what Kyle was saying, this is exactly what we're seeing, So we have many farmers who believe that their soil is, heavily depleted of minerals, of nutrients, right? And so they've got to buy and apply to put those nutrients back. We have many agronomists who believe the same thing. Many in industry and in our universities who believe the same thing. Yet we have done innumerable soil tests, and I'm specifically now talking about a total nutrient digestion test, okay? And which is a complete extraction test. Not even once have I seen, in doing these many, many thousands of T&D tests, a soil that is truly minerally deficient, which is the exact opposite of what a standard soil test is showing that farmer, but the methodologies are very different. The standard soil test is showing less than 1/10 of the reality of the soil, but the T&D is revealing everything. So basically, like Kyle said, we've been fed a line of bull. Our soils still have what they need. God assured that. Okay. And again, do we trust him or not? Do we believe him or not? But it is still there. And the T&D tests themselves are proving that. So what's the key? The key is restoring the life to the soil, the biology to the soil, because that is what God placed there to unlock the still abundant stores of minerals that are in our soils. So they're still there, they're still available. Our problem is we have damaged the very life that God himself created to be able to provide those minerals on a just-in-time, just-as-needed basis. Kyle, any further comments?
I have some. If you're wanting a minute, Kyle, and this is going to take a minute to develop, but so I often say that the more we learn about science, the more true God's word becomes, right? It's always true. It's always been totally true, right? But for example, one of the greatest throwaway lines in the Bible of all time is, "And he made the stars also." And when you look at the night sky with the naked eye, even in a place without light pollution, you're talking a couple thousand stars that you can count by, with the naked eye. And then they just look like little twinkling lights up there. Well, there are stars up there that are so big that if the Earth was the size of a golf ball, you could fill a college football stadium with golf balls with the number of Earths that would fit inside of that star. So, and he made the stars also, then Alan brings in the microbe shedding of the animals, right? And like, we understand these things now. We're coming to understand more. And as you ask people like Alan and Gabe and others, how much of what's going on in the soil do we understand? They'll say a fraction, right? A small fraction. And we continue to learn more. And my favorite example of that is when I first started this Working Cows podcast journey, it was a double handful of soil had as many microbes as there were people on the earth. Well, now I think we're down to a teaspoon of soil has as many microbes as there are people on the earth. And then the final point on this diatribe is I was listening to a podcast one time with 3 theologians talking, and one of them, just as a passing reference, said the Sahara Desert was created by overgrazing. Like, everybody knows this from history. This is just the truth of history. The Sahara Desert was created by overgrazing. Well, what's the key to fixing what created the Sahara Desert? The mismanagement of livestock. What's the key to fixing the Sahara Desert? The proper management of livestock. Right? And so it's God in his wisdom designed this system to work well when it's managed well, right? And so I think all those things just keep on coming up for me in this conversation.
And that is such a crucial point because, number one, it means we have agency to change and make the situation better with our behavior and our practices. And number two, and probably most of all in our modern societies, it brings hope. You think about the mental health statistics in our modern world. Oh my gosh, like, how desperately do we need a message of hope in our world? So I went to Purdue University and I was part of an environmental cohort. And this was about 6 years ago now. And I remember we were talking about climate change and that sort of topic. And one of the girls said, I didn't even want to get out of bed this morning because I was so depressed because of what I learned about climate change, because it's past the tipping point. We're done. We're toast. There's nothing we can do. We're just kind of running out the clock. And I mean, that again, it's opposing the message that we're providing, and that actually there is a lot of hope. There are a lot of things that we can do to make the situation better. And, I truly believe that on a global scale too, not just on a community level, but on a global scale.
Again, there's always so many different directions that we could go, but is there more that you want to include here, or things that are also on your list, or thoughts that you had going into this conversation that you want to make sure we include?
Well, I want to let me give a real life example. Um, and I think that's important. We're talking about what happened in Old Testament days and all of that, and that's crucial and critical that we understand that. But we need to relate it to today. And can those same things occur today relative to the abundance, to the return, with good stewardship and all of that? And so a few weeks ago, I did a workshop that was hosted by one of our clients, and I've been working with them for some time now, a little more than a decade, and located in South Texas. Pretty tough environment, right? And they were very conventional ranchers when I first started working with them. Great people, you know, Christian people, and but very conventional ranchers. And it's a father and son. And I still recall, and they shared this with me later, not immediately after that first meeting with them, but after the first meeting with them, and I, started explaining adaptive grazing and regenerative management and all of this. And, you know, the father and son looked at each other, and the father asked the son, he said, so what did you think about what Alan shared with us? And the son's immediate response to his father was, that man's crazy. Yeah, I said, we're not doing any of that. That won't work here. He's lost his mind. He doesn't understand at all how to ranch down here in South Texas. But in spite of all of that and that skepticism, they decided to give it a try. Okay. And initially, the truth was to just prove and show this doesn't work here. Okay. That was more the mindset early. But it did. And fast forward, a decade later, and at this workshop where we had a lot of other ranchers there, and they've been in the middle of a pretty big drought down there this year, right? And yet they have increased their carrying capacity 30%. So they're carrying 30% more cows. Okay. But here's another key factor on that. Beyond their home ranch that they own, they were also leasing 2 other ranches to run cattle on. They let go of those leases. And just on the home ranch acres alone, with letting go of additional leased acres, they are running 30% more cows than they were running when we first started. Okay. And the cows in the middle of all of this drought were in excellent body condition. You couldn't, and they had over 850 cows. Okay. You couldn't find a poor cow in the entire herd. They were all in excellent body condition. And yet when you looked around the neighboring ranches, that were badly impacted by the drought, their cows were really suffering. You saw a lot of poor body condition cows. In the middle of this drought, on over 850 cows this year, in the middle of all of that, they had a 98% conception rate on more than 850 cows. Okay. So we're not talking about 30 cows. Okay. On more than 850 cows, a 98% conception rate. No supplemental feed stuff. Only what they were grazing in the pastures in the middle of a drought. We had this incredible fence line comparison, and luckily we got it in pictures and in film. So we actually had a film crew there that day filming as well for a new documentary, and we were able to capture this fence line comparison. So this fence line comparison, we're standing on their side of the fence, literally a knee to waist deep forage in the middle of a drought, right across the fence, immediately across the fence. It's like this tabletop here, okay? And they're feeding, they're caking the cows, they're haying the cows and all of this, and it's still August, okay? So they're feeding the cows because there literally is nothing to eat there. And mere inches across the fence, it's knee deep to waist deep, and our clients are not feeding a lick of hay, no cake, no nothing, okay? Now, interestingly, the neighbors' cows were desperately, you could tell where they had been desperately trying to reach up underneath the fence along that whole fence line to graze whatever they could potentially reach on our client's side of the fence, you know? So again, when you look at those statistics, you look at that return to abundance, and then we dug in their soil again in the middle of a South Texas drought, very hot, very dry. Dug in the soil. Their soil was still moist, was still aggregated. We did a water infiltration test, multiple ones. They were averaging anywhere from 6 seconds to a minute in the middle of this drought, infiltrating water, okay? And one other point I want to bring up. So we had all of these other ranchers there witnessing this. And we were standing in that one field that I was describing to you that is immediately adjacent to the incredible fence line comparison. So thank you to the other neighbor for allowing this fence line comparison. But they have built far more abundance in their pastures now. When we first started with them, it was a lot of monoculture, either monoculture Bahia, monoculture Bermuda, this and this, right? Now they've built all this abundance. But of course, in that abundance, what are we seeing? A lot of herbs or forbs, or what a lot of people call weeds. And so we were standing in this pasture in the middle of a drought with cows that are in excellent body condition, 98% conception rate, not feeding any hay. Remember all of that, okay? And it's knee deep to waist deep. And I asked the other ranchers, and I told them, be very honest with me. How many of you would look across this field and see a lot of weeds and say, I either need to spray this or mow this? Quite a few of those ranchers were honest, and they raised their hands and they said, yeah, I would spray it or mow it. I don't want all these weeds. And I said, guys, they're not feeding any hay. They're not caking. Their body condition's excellent. 98% conception rate. Why do you not want these other plants that you're calling weeds here? So there's a real life example.
Yeah. And what's the difference from one side of the fence to the other? It's management, which goes back to what we were talking about earlier, the fact that mankind is here to help the earth be more abundant, right?
And let's take it back, though, Clay. Let's call it what it is. It's stewardship.
Exactly.
Or lack thereof.
Yep. Kyle, I saw you taking notes again.
Yeah, I tend to have thoughts going in every direction, so I wanted to write it down. Alan, you and I were talking about just today this idea of 2 weeks away from a drought. We hear that all across America. I've heard it in the UK and across Europe. Maybe there needs to be an add-on to the end of that. 2 weeks away from a drought in my current circumstance. And as a consultant, our job is to say, actually, hey, you have agency with your management. Next year, it could be 3 weeks away from a drought. And that's a major win. That's a huge environmental and economic win for you. And then the next year, maybe you're 4 weeks away from a drought, right? So statements like that, again, get my mind thinking that we have so much agency to change and ameliorate the situation.
Yep. We are not a parasite. Like you said, we're not an evolved accident that is a drain on the resources. We were here to steward the earth, to make it better, and we still can. And so I think those are some of the major takeaways for me from this conversation. Any other final thoughts kind of as we point towards wrapping up? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the last thing that I had was so I went back and I read God's promise to Abram before he became Abraham. And it's so interesting that he's promising him all these blessings, right? He said, if you go on this adventure and you point your aim upward, and like I'm telling you, you'll be blessed. Your descendants will be more than the stars in the sky. There'll be nations, all of these things. And he said, I'll bless you. But then he ends with, and thou shalt be a blessing. So how important is it, and this could be a controversial thing to say, and we can edit it out if it's too bad, but like a $12 billion aid package to farmers, right? Farmers don't want that. They want to be the ones giving. They don't want to be the ones receiving that. And in essence, it shows that this whole system to me is a little bit cursed, and that we've created a system where farmers are producing below the cost of production, and they've forced their hand into that situation. So now the taxpayer has to come out and bail the farmer, and the farmer doesn't want that. They want to be the blessing, right? So that's kind of where my mind went. I hope that's not too controversial. I'm all for the farmer. I'm if anything too forgiving of them, and so focused on the system and creating the system that allows farmers to be the blessing again.
Well, I think that where we're at really does stem from that mindset that man is a evolved accident and a drain on the resources, really, where we are in our world. And that, what the to counteract that. So that kind of thinking says, we don't have abundance. There isn't abundance out there. There is limited resources. And, so we have to farm in this way. Well, no, that's not the truth. The truth is we need to align our stewardship with God's design, which I think the 6 principles of soil health captures well, that aligning of the stewardship with those things, the 6, the 3, and the 4. When we align it with those things, then we can create abundance, and there is not this limited set of resources. And really, it all comes down to education. The agronomists have been educated to believe that there are these finite set of resources. For mostly worse, for better or for worse, but mostly worse, the agronomists are the ones doing the educating of the farmers, and so they're trained to believe we've got to buy and apply rather than align our management with the 6, the 3, and the 4, and allow the landscape to be abundant. Is that lining up, with what you're saying? I think we're kind of saying the same thing here.
Absolutely. And we're all Christian and we have that worldview, but for someone that's even secular, I think there's so much research and so much science to back up exactly what we're saying, right? The all important E word that gets thrown around, efficiency. Our agricultural system is supposed to be, the most efficient the world's ever seen, but that's only in the metrics that people are looking at. And it's my opinion that when you look at the 4 ecosystem processes, our agricultural system is woefully inefficient in capturing and using solar energy. It's woefully inefficient in infiltrating water and using that water and holding it for later. It's woefully inefficient, like Alan said, of using all the latent banks of nutrients that are in the soil, because we're farming in a flower pot mostly in the top 6 inches. And a whole lot of farms have way more subsoil with a giant nutrient bank lower than that root zone that we're just not taking advantage of. And then the 4th one is life. We're just not living and promoting life to the abundance, which can fix that whole thing and make all of those first 3 cycles work. So, it's an exciting time to be in agriculture. I just encourage any young person, it's a very intellectual career field, and it's a very scientific career field. And I think, in the next 5 to 10 years especially, we're going to get so much good research showing the benefits of a regenerative agricultural system, or whatever you want to call it, that focuses on building up those cycles, those ecosystem processes. And actually, that's the true efficiency that we need to be aiming for. And to Alan's point, it's abundant. I mean, we're not even skimming the surface, in my opinion.
Yeah, very good. Alan, anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, I would like to read a passage here that I think sums all of this up pretty darn well. And it is Psalm chapter 8.
Hmm.
And it goes like this: O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. From the mouths of children and infants you have ordained praise, on account of your adversaries, to silence the enemy and avenger. When I behold your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, or the son of man that you care for him? Yet you made him a little lower than the angels, and you crowned him with glory and honor. You made him ruler of the works of your hands. You placed everything under his feet, all sheep and oxen, and even the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, the fish of the sea, all that swims the paths of the sea. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. That is our charge, guys. That is what we're put here to do. And look at the responsibility that God gave us. He wants to trust us. He wants to allow us to do this. Psalm 8 sums it up, I think, very well.
Yeah, very good. I hesitate to add anything to that, but I will just say that we tend to rush to Jesus too quickly, and that maybe sounds bad, but when we are reading the Old Testament, because that ultimately Jesus is the one who's crowned with glory, right? Through his, and Philippians 2 tells us it's because of his death on the cross that he and his resurrection that he was crowned with that glory, right? But when David wrote that, he was thinking about mankind. Yeah, God had in mind Jesus and his ultimate glory, but David was thinking about mankind when he wrote that. You crowned him with glory, you made him a little lower than the angels, and you gave him responsibility and stewardship over all of the earth. And so, yes, ultimately, yes and amen, Jesus, but also don't sell yourself short in what God put you here to do, right? And I think that is an important thing to see there. Guys, I really appreciate the conversation. Alan, Kyle, thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Clay.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Obviously, really appreciate Dr. Alan Williams and Kyle Richardville and their willingness to just give that perspective and help us to think a little differently about, this is just a list of regulations. No, there's more to it than that in the Bible, and there was more going on there, and I really appreciate their help in wedding our perspectives together of regenerative agriculture and a Christian worldview, and just a really great conversation. Really appreciate that. So appreciate them using that topic to kind of cap off this partnership together, and very much have appreciate the opportunity to work with them over the last couple of years with them and their consultants in a really close way to get the word out about what they're doing. Coming up next on the Working Cows podcast, we'll be talking to Juan Whiting from the Hinterlands Institute about the work that they're doing there, kind of a springboard off of an earlier conversation with Major Eric Chaya about the work of regenerating Army bases, military bases, Department of Defense bases around the world, and taking all of those acres and putting them under regenerative management. And Hinterland Institute is doing similar work. So we'll be talking to him about that coming up your way real soon on another episode of the Working Cows podcast. We look forward to sharing it with you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.